Thank you, Stephen Luby, for being with us today. Thank you so much.
My great pleasure.
Stephen Luby is a famous producer in Australia, and you just recently won the most outstanding TV miniseries.
Yes, we did win. We did win the Logie Award a few weeks ago, and that was a bit of excitement after a project, The Secret River, which took 9 years to produce. So it was nice to get a little kind of something at the end to put a full stop underneath it, but to acknowledge the project and the story. And would you believe I've got it with me?
Oh, no way.
A real live Logie.
Oh, congratulations.
There it is.
Oh
That is a Logie Award. Would you like
wow.
to?
Oh, yes, please. Oh, that's amazing. The most outstanding miniseries. Oh, this is great.
That was the result. As I said, it's a little silver statue, but it does symbolise a very big job over a long period of time. And the award's not just for me, it's for the team of people who made the show, which was a huge team over a long period of time. So I'm the custodian of it, but it really is for the show itself. And that was, as I said, a very big project with a lot of people and a lot of creative energy went into it over a long period of time.
How did you feel when you were sitting there at the table with everybody and then it was like The Secret River?
To be honest, we didn't expect to win it because there was 6 or 7 other miniseries and telemovies in the category with us, some of which I'd seen and some of which were really good. I just thought the competition was very, very strong. There was one miniseries, for instance, about the life of Peter Allen, which I'd seen, which was a brilliant piece of entertainment about Peter Allen and his life, and had wonderful song and dance production values in it. It was really, really good piece of television.
Yes.
And there was another great miniseries called Catching Mallette, which was about the police investigation into Ivan Mallette. So it wasn't about the Belanglo murders as such, but it was about the police who tracked him down, and that was a brilliant series as well. So we had a lot of stiff competition, and we were given no indication by the Logies people as to whether or not we'd won. I had counted myself out really, and then all of a sudden, I've got to go.
Did you have anything prepared?
Look, I did have a little speech prepared just in case.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I didn't get through all my prepared speech because the Logies people insist that you only have a 40-second thank you speech.
Okay.
Now, nobody obeys that, and my speech was twice as long as that.
Was it?
But it was still one of the shortest speeches of the night. But when you get up there at the 40-second mark, you're looking out into the audience, and there's a big auto cue screen in the middle distance, and it's a big red flashing sign saying, "Get off, get off, get off." So I got up there, I got halfway through my speech, and then I saw "Get off."
Oh, no.
And I thought, I better go. So we all walked off, and I omitted to say some of the things that I really would like to have said. But nevertheless, I covered the key themes.
You did. It was a really good speech. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, put that on Facebook.
Oh, okay, yes. Did you do that? Or?
I did.
Yeah, I did, okay. That's right, you copied it for me, that's right. Very pleased to have with me on the stage for that award 3 people who were very, very key to the whole production. One of whom was Dana Reid, who was the director, and Dana just done an absolutely mighty job on a very big scale. A scale that's beyond what's average in Australian television, so it was a very hard job for her, but she did it brilliantly. And then my business partner, Mark Roos, was there, and Mark and I had developed this project over that 9-year period, and we'd been both there from day one. And Trevor Jamieson, who was Indigenous actor who played the main Aboriginal character in The Secret River.
Yes.
And I really wanted Trevor to be there as a symbol of the Indigenous contribution to the story and the production, because, as you may know, it's a story about the dispossession of Indigenous Australians at the time of first white settlement. So it's a big, very dramatic and sometimes confronting story. Very difficult for the Aboriginal actors to actually perform because of some of the violence against their forebears that takes place in the story. But they did it with such conviction and such desire to convey the truth of our history that Trevor kind of symbolised all of that, and it was just great to have him up there with us as well. In that little moment, we tried to crystallise all the things that the show was about.
It talks about the dark narrative side of the history of Australia. Would you like to collaborate with other Aboriginal writers, producers and directors to show that other side?
Absolutely. I mean, the whole project was an eye-opener to me. I'm just a white suburban guy who's grown up in, your average middle-class sort of environment in suburbia. You don't have that much contact with Australian Indigenous people unless you live in particular enclaves like Redfern or etc. But as a rule, rule, you don't have that much contact. So to be exposed to the history, both through the book and the production, to be engaged with the people, the Indigenous people who are conveying that history and that story in front of your eyes, that opened my mind to this whole other reality of Australia, which most of us from white, middle-class, standard suburbia don't have much contact with. Now, I had one particular experience during the production when we had a rehearsal evening for a corroboree scene that we were doing in the mini-series. Indigenous people from all over Australia had come to our location, which was up in East Gippsland, in a remote area, and they'd come on this particular afternoon to do a rehearsal that night, which we did just indoors, with a view to preparing for the shoot the following day. In the room, we had a community hall up at Lakes Entrance where we were doing this rehearsal, and there would have been about 40 Indigenous people from all different regions and tribal groups across the country who'd all come together for it. Myself and Dana were the only two white people in there, and there was 45 Indigenous people in a big circle all discussing how are we going to convey this traditional corroboree ritual. And I looked around at all the faces and heard all the different languages. They're all speaking in their different languages, and I thought, am I in Australia? And I am,
yes,
but I'd never been in that sort of Australia, and it was just a remarkable eye-opener to think that this is Australia. So I was very engaged with all of that and would just love to tell more stories in this zone.
Because it's become so multicultural now, Melbourne and Sydney, and you know, you go in Melbourne, you go down Lygon Street or Brunswick Street or Chinatown, and there's just so many stories to tell, and it's really exciting for the industry.
And it is interesting, you can have your mind expanded by these things, even if you're just making a TV show. You can actually, as with The Secret River, it was a bit of a mind-expanding exercise. You could apply that more broadly by telling stories amongst other cultural groups. So, for instance, if one's to tell a story about a migrant or refugee, you know, as a producer or a writer or a participant, you would become exposed to that in a real personal way, as well as just making the show. So it does kind of open your mind to different ways of seeing and doing and living, which is quite a wonderful side benefit of doing something like this.
Yes. The diversity of seeing, you know, those faces on Australian screen, do you think Australia is screaming for those type of shows?
I think this capacity to represent what is true about our broad multiculture is growing and expanding. And I think, for instance, of a show like Redfern Now, which was set amongst the urban Aboriginal community of Redfern. I think 10 years ago that show couldn't have been made. The audience wouldn't have been ready for it, but now it is, and it just seems like a natural thing. There's all sorts of other Indigenous-inspired stories like The Secret River that are being made. There's a number of production companies around now who specialise in this sort of area, and these will just become stock standard faces and themes on Australian television. Now, I think the same expanded awareness evolution will happen in other spheres of other cultures as well. So obviously one of the big ones at the moment is exploration of Islamic and Muslim issues, the Muslim community, and I think there'll be a lot of stuff in that space happening in years to come, in the the immediate future, because that just represents what is actually real about Australia now. So that has to somehow find its way onto our screens, and I think the audience is ready for this. Yeah.
Looking at the choices that you made in terms of like the cast and the crew, I mean, you've just got an amazing cast, and you know, the director, Dana Reed, and how did you choose those people?
To go back to the very first originating idea behind The Secret River was the book. The novel by Kate Grenville, which is a totally brilliant novel, and mini-series aside, I recommend everybody to read this novel, The Secret River. Because it is such an evocation of what it must have been like in the early period of white settlement of Australia. The wildness of the bush, the remoteness, the dispossession of the people who came here, who themselves in turn dispossessed the Indigenous people. There was a whole series of terrible struggles that everybody was dealing with, and the book conveys this. In wanting to make the miniseries, we wanted to be absolutely true to the book. So every decision we made was about being true to the book. One could have gone down the track of telling the story as if it was a white pioneer frontier adventure. So you could have focused on that. But that was not what the book was really about. The book was about the interplay between the Indigenous inhabitants and the white arrivals, and it was about the moral conflict that happened there. So it wasn't an adventure story, really. It was about this moral conflict. So every choice that we made was about, you know, who can help us convey that. All of our casting, for instance, we wanted to make the whole representation of the story really visceral and gutsy, so we didn't want to sanitise it. Locations to look harsh and remote and wild. Costume, the makeup, the performances to feel gutsy and gritty and raw. These were the things that informed all our decisions. So when it came to auditions, for instance, we were looking for actors who could give us this level of gutsy reality. Those who end up being selected, that element stood out in their auditions. Marianne Jade from Mora Fay ran the casting show with a bit of help from her colleague Lee Pickford, and they were both fantastic. And I literally have never seen anybody work so hard in my life to get this cast together. It was just a phenomenal effort.
Did you have people in mind?
Look, we did. We had people in mind originally, but not just one person.
No.
We did a brainstorm initially for all the key cast, and there were probably 30 people on that list for each of the main roles.
Oh, amazing.
Wouldn't it be good if we had, or, oh, what about, and then the list expanded. And then, of course, having made such a big list, we had to do something with it.
Yes.
And that meant getting screen tests or checking availability. So,
of course.
in some cases, of the 30 people we might have chosen for a role, you do an availability check and 15 of them can't do it anyway. So you're down to 15, you screen test those people, and then you're looking for these elements that I was describing of back and forth, seeing auditions, getting people back for new auditions, consultations amongst the director and myself and the ABC executives. Very exhaustive process.
Yeah.
There came a time when we were looking overseas as well. There was a lot of back and forth between agents in London and the US. It was round-the-clock correspondence happening, so Marianne, just her energy did not flag for 1 minute over a 6-month period of this.
Dana Reid, how did you decide for her to come on board?
Dana, in recent years, has developed a reputation for doing special mini-series. She, for instance, directed Paper Giants, which was the story of the establishment of Cleo on the ABC about 3 or 4 years ago, which was a huge hit. 2-part mini-series like The Secret River. The 2-part mini-series is a particular form that requires certain skills and creative angles on things, and it was obvious from Paper Giants that Dana had that. But she then went on to do another mini-series called How's That, which was about the establishment of World Series cricket in the 1970s. And that itself was a big undertaking to depict a period, the 1970s. Dana had done that, it was very successful. And then for Channel 7, she did Life and History of In Excess, the band In Excess. So she had in her kit bag 3 big recent mini-series, so that was number 1 criteria. Myself and my business partner Mark had also worked with Dana on a series that we'd done some years before at the ABC called Bed of Roses, which was a light drama series that ran for some years. And Dana had directed numerous episodes of that, and we just knew her to be somebody that we could work with. Dana and I had started work together in the mainstream Australian industry on the same day with the same company 20 years ago. We worked for a company called Artist Services, which was a major producer of comedy series.
Yes.
And Dana was engaged as a performer or an actor in this series, and I was engaged as a producer, and we started our job on the same day with Sean McAuliffe. So Sean and Dana and I started together, and we've known each other since then, and we've just kept tabs on each other's evolving careers. Dana was somebody I felt an affinity with as a long-term collaborator. That was a reason to have her involved. But even then, we asked Dana, amongst a number of other directors, to pitch to us they might direct the show on the basis of having read the scripts.
So she did have competition.
So there was competition. So and the ABC required us to interview 5 or 6 directors with this in mind, and to get them all to pitch to us. So Dana had to go through that process. And we had some wonderful directors pitching to us, but again, just on the grounds of an engagement and an affinity with the story, and a real sense that Dana wanted to convey this visceral, gutsy element of our history, her application, so to speak, won the day.
It was outstanding.
Oh, it was outstanding. Yeah, no, it was outstanding. So outstanding application for a job. And then we became, great creative collaborators for the next couple of years as the show evolved.
When you were actually on stage at the Logies, you said that you went through a really, really hard time producing the show, and just as all the elements that are involved. Can you tell me more about all the problems that went on?
I can't tell you about all the problems because we don't have time. But there were a lot of problems, and they were to do with the scale of it.
Okay.
And the scale, our desire to achieve a certain level of scale was because of that founding principle we had, which was to be authentic to the book. For instance, in depicting what it might have been like in the town of Sydney Cove back in 1810 when the story is set, we wanted to make that look as real as we could. So we had to design and build a set placed in a live location. It was not in a studio. To build a set of that sort of scale in a live location, which is also subject to the weather and all sorts of other, natural kind of forces of that sort, it cost a lot of money. And the money that it cost put pressure on the whole show. But the only way to achieve the authenticity was to spend that money and to put it out in a live location like that. 2 days before we were due to shoot those Sydney Cove scenes, there was an unseasonable weather event of just high winds overnight, and the whole set blew down.
Oh no.
So months and months of work, the set was just blown over. So with 2 days to go before we started shooting, our art department had to rebuild that set. They were already under incredible pressure, but then had to go into a day and night mode, and they had to get a whole lot of extra people in and to get the thing ready for the shoot.
And how much did that cost?
Oh, look, I think that weather event itself ended up costing about $40,000 to replace.
Wow.
Yeah. But it was more the time pressure that it created. The art department from that time on, because they had to put all their resources into repairing that, they were then just behind the 8 ball on everything else they had to do for the rest of the series. And they were stretched to just working round the clock in multiple locations, some in New South Wales, some in Victoria, some in Melbourne, some in remote areas, and they were just kind of zooming around everywhere trying to get everything ready. So that's a bit of an example of the difficulty, that as soon as you have one thing go wrong, it just has this knock-on effect. On another occasion, we were due to film our key sequences with boats on the Hawkesbury River. Logistically arranged our whole crew to go from Melbourne to Sydney, and we had the boats and we had all of the mechanics and infrastructure organised to shoot on the water with our hero boats and crew boats where we had all our cameras, and safety boats where we had all our kind of maritime infrastructure, and another boat with cast on it so they could be dressed and etc. So this was taking hundreds of people to Sydney. The night before we were due to engage this huge exercise, there was a huge storm.
Oh no.
On Sydney Harbour and on the Northern Beaches area. We were advised by a maritime advisor that it was just totally unsafe to put any boat on the water in the next 3 days. But we only had 2 days, that's all we had.
2 days.
So we had to abandon that shoot in Sydney, and we had to relocate to Melbourne overnight with our whole crew of 100 people, and we had a convoy of trucks coming back.
Wow.
And it cost a fortune, which we eventually got back in insurance, but on the day we didn't know we were going to get the insurance back. The weather just has a huge effect when you're dealing with these sort of logistics, and it was pretty stressful.
Oh, definitely, I can imagine. How did you become a producer, and what does a producer do?
I've been a producer for 30 odd years, and I still don't know what a producer does. I'm joking, but only half joking, because I've discovered over the years that whatever I've learned about producing on all of my previous projects, a lot of that doesn't apply on the next project, because each project is so distinctive that you come across things that you've never come across before. And that's happened every project I've produced going back for 30 years. The role of the producer overall can be at best described as the producer being the person or persons who have responsibility for a project from the day of its inception or conception, which might be the day you have a discussion in a coffee shop, which is along the lines of, wouldn't it be a great idea to make a film about Marcela Toro? And so that's an idea on the serviette in a coffee shop. But to go from that point to the point where we write a script about Marcela, and then we raise finance for the film. And then we do casting, who's going to play Marcela and who's going to play all of the other players in the Marcela story. And then we film it, and then we edit it, and then we market it, and we get it out on television or in cinemas, and then to DVD. And then, God forbid, we do the audit and the tax accounts. That whole process can take many years, and the hands-on producer is the person who's there all day, every day, doing supervising and responsible for all that process. So that's kind of what a producer does. It's an overall supervisory role of all the aspects, both on screen and behind the scenes, of the making of a film or of a TV series or a web series. That's the best description that I can come up with of what a producer does. How did I become a producer? It's very hard to train in an academic sense for this. A lot of my learning has happened on the job, and I've learned bit by bit over many years. I did begin in the television business as a researcher for a documentary company. So I was purely doing research, doing interviews with people and looking up information and collating it and putting it into documents for directors and producers. And by virtue of that, working with this small documentary company, I was eventually asked by the company boss, my first boss, if I'd like to produce one of these documentaries. And so I graduated, so to speak, from being a researcher into being a producer. And for the next 5 or 6 years, I produced 4 or 5 docos a year for 5 or 6 years. At the doco end, you have to do everything. So you have to write the script, direct often, get the crew and cast together, edit it. I used to physically edit everything myself. So I had this real hands-on experience of doing everything that's required to make a screen content. And that's kind of how I learned to be a producer as well, by doing everything and learning what the process was. So I apply that knowledge to each show that I do now. So in a way, being a producer is about being hands-on in every element of the making of a program.
You and Mark Roos, your business partner, you both have different roles, and for The Secret River, he was the executive producer and you were the producer. Can you tell me what specifically you both did separately?
So Mark and I, Mark Roos and Stephen Luby, that's me, formed Ruby Entertainment, which is RU for Roos and BY for Luby, in the year 2000. Prior to that, we'd been independent producers, working as sole traders, so to speak. We came together and we combined our resources, our contacts and our skill sets into our small company, and over those years we have developed many projects together. So when we're in what we call development mode, we work together in coming up with ideas, engaging script writers, meeting with writers, trying to raise finance, etc. This is all the development phase of a project. In the case of The Secret River, for instance, Mark and I worked in development together on that project for 5 or 6 years. But there comes a point where the show transitions from development into production, and the production element is totally all-absorbing for the producer, and we can't afford to have the resources of the two of us 100% involved in each production. So we have to divide our time and expertise. So on any given project, one of us takes on the role of being the hands-on producer when it goes from development into production, because that hands-on job is 24/7 for some years. If both of us went into that 24/7 for some years, all the other forward planning work of our company would grind to a halt. So this is why we have to divide our resources. So one of us becomes the hands-on producer and gets the producer credit. And in The Secret River's case, that was me. The other party, in that case it was Mark, continues doing all the other work of our company, developing new projects, which is kind of like the executive work of Ruby Entertainment. And that person retains the role of executive producer. On our next project, we might go the other way. So Mark might become the hands-on physical producer, and I might continue on the work of the company in an executive role. That's a description of those interchangeable roles.
How do you stay motivated?
It's not easy to stay motivated in the sense that an experience of something like The Secret River, to take an example from my earlier career, I did a feature film with Mick Malloy called Crackerjack, which was a big hit at the time and just tremendous fun to do and such a high to be involved with. You kind of think, how can you repeat that? Big profile projects that are successful and engage with an audience, they don't come along every day and they take a lot of work to make them happen. At the end of them, you go into a bit of a downer. You've had to operate at a high energy level for quite a long time to get them over the line. Naturally, your energy levels go off a bit. Then you've got to crank up your energy levels for a new project. How do you do that? Well, you need a breather first of all after a big project. Basically, you've got to land on an idea that enthuses you in the way that those previous projects did. So we're always looking for the ideas and the stuff that we love. If you love it, you suddenly get the spark for it.
Yes.
So it's really a matter of choosing the projects that you love. They've got their own energy inside them. So as soon as a new project comes along that's got that spark in it, you think, haha, now I can fan the flames again.
Definitely has to be something, a passion.
It has to be a passion. The main reason, and I think it might be clear from my previous answers, to produce a show from the very beginning to the very end over a long period of time, to be there all day, every day, supervising the whole thing, being responsible, having the buck stop with you all the time, it takes a lot of time, effort and energy. So whenever a new project comes along, the first question I ask of myself is, do I love it enough to give that much of my life to it? So that's always the first question.
What advice would you give to the younger self?
To my younger self?
To your younger self.
On the basis of what I now know, advise my younger self to have a second string to my bow over and above or separate to producing projects that I love. Because producing projects that I love, like The Secret River or Crackerjack or Bed of Roses, an ABC series that we did, takes up all your time and effort, but sometimes you come out the other end of it, and to have to crank up again, as I've described, is not easy to do. If along the way I have had a second string to my bow, like something I do now, which is teach. I teach an introductory course to producing, and I'm developing quite an interest in doing that, and I wish I had have done that years ago now, because that's kind of something that is easier for me to do, can be more consistent in terms of just having something to do during the day and income earning, and would have enabled a bedrock of consistency to be there for me as a producer while I'm working on these bigger projects. But if you're solely devoted to bigger projects, you have periods of very intense activity and income earning, and then sometimes you can go for a year without earning anything. So you've got to make sure you save your money. So it'd be good to have just had some other small, consistent sideline. Back in the day, I never thought that way. I've only think that way now, but I would advise anybody starting in the business to think about that question. What
would you say to students, so after they, say, for example, finish VCA and then get onto a show, get attached to a show, what advice would you give to them just starting out?
And I've become very concerned with that question because so many people ask it to me, and so many people wanting to get into the industry ask me that question. So much so that I've thought about it a lot, and in recent years, as I've said, I've actually teach a course that's about this. So I've devised my own short course, which I teach a couple of times a year. I do, in that course, run through for people some of the key elements of local knowledge about what the industry actually is, so that people go into it knowing what they're getting themselves in for. Without going into the full detail of my course, it's really just worth knowing, for instance, how funding and finance works in the film and TV business, how the TV networks decide upon shows that they want to do or not do. It's really important to know these things because you can tailor your activity according to that knowledge. Going blind into the industry, not knowing this stuff, you could just go down lots of blind alleys and get involved in things that are going to go nowhere. You can make mistakes in terms of career moves and stuff because you don't really know what the industry's about. So I'm very concerned to be able to convey this to people.
For students and for newcomers, it's so hard to get that funding because they don't have the credits or anything, so they have to be attached to a project and work so hard to actually even be noticed by these funding bodies. And yourself, you're at that high calibre with other producers, and so there's no way a student or someone who's been in the industry for 5 years is going to get the funding that they need.
No, people who've got the screen credit of a producer are the only ones who can get the government funding. So how does somebody who doesn't have that credit get that credit if the prerequisite for that credit is having done it before? It's a catch-22. But there is a way through it. And I very fortunately had this happen to me. You need to be apprenticed by or mentored by a senior producer. That's what happened to me when I started out in the business. And I've tried to do that for a few kind of younger colleagues of mine in recent years. If you have a mentor who takes you under their wing, they will eventually take you with them and give you a credit. That's the way that it works.
Okay.
As a new person starting in the industry, I would be looking for the company or organisation or individual which you are simpatico with who will mentor you. There's another way of going forward in the industry, and it's a way that's very new. It's got to do with the prevalence of the online screen world. To make online content like we're doing now, you don't need a credit. You only need minimal funding, and yet this program that we're doing now will go out on YouTube and could well be seen by millions of people around the world.
Yes.
In the online world, there is a great capacity or great opportunity to create a career for yourself without being subject to the funding system. It's still not easy.
No.
But it doesn't require you to go through those same hoops.
Yes.
The work is just as hard though.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I really, really appreciate it. You've just been absolutely magnificent, and I wish you all the very, very best in the future, and hopefully maybe you can be my mentor.
Now, you put me on the spot on international television, so we'll talk about this off air.
Okay.
But yes, of course. Okay.
Thank you for watching Screenchat. If you would like to see some more stories like this one, please subscribe.